Thanks everybody for making the time. Our focus today is going to be to start talking about the user lifecycle management. So we're going to build on what we started in the last session. So the last session um, we we basically got an AD connector hooked up. We went through some initial steps about importing uh, the entitlements which are there, the group memberships which are there in AD, and the users. So today we're going to basically build on that, and um, we're going to talk about how we can automate the user lifecycle management, right? So this is about um, being able to onboard users, in automate their journey through a corporation, meaning um, changes in their job function, moving through the organization, but also life events like things like name changes, going on leave, handling those kind of statuses that may occur, and then finally when someone leaves, right? So we want to be able to automate that. It's a fair amount to cover in in these topics. So we've broken out over 3 sessions. So today we're gonna just kind of basically get into the basics of it. We'll talk about the OpenIAM access control model, and the reason we're going down that path is because it basically plays an essential role in basically being able to automate the JML processes, right? We'll talk about the business rules. The business rules are complementary to the access control model, and then finally we'll kind of get into some basics about how we can connect to our source system and be able to start working on implementing a basic joiner process. So here's just recap in terms of this was a diagram that we kind of introduced, last time. And so basically what is, it's kind of showing that you have an HR system, we have a connector to it. It brings data in, it goes to the synchronization service, it does some processing, and then the outcome of that processing gets handed off to a service to be able to provision and deprovision, which then sends messages down to the connectors to actually do the work, right? And then, so I basically broke out these steps and I said, well, here's what we've done so far, right? So the things marked as session two, those were things that we covered in the last session that we did. The items broken out for today, these are, how we define roles, the, business access rule, the birthright access rules, connecting to your source, the synchronization scripts. That's what we're going to focus on today. And then next time we'll go deeper into it. We'll get into more about the Groovy scripting related to those synchronization scripts. We'll look at also building out an attribute level policy map to push data down into your downstream systems. And then from there, we'll go into additional cases like how we use that same infrastructure to handle levers and movers. We'll also talk about how we can integrate these with the workflows and send out notifications by email. So all of the kind of the basic things that we've been seeing our customers doing, we're going to try to introduce at least some basic foundation about it so that if you wanted to implement them, that we've covered them in at least some detail so that you can, proceed with those activities. And as always, if you have questions, feel free to fire away. Just trying to see where. Okay. So when we talk about the OpenIAM access control model, um, we have a few objects. So there are a couple of different ways that we could have approached it. We could have created a generic access control object called an entitlement, and we could have extended it from there. We took a different path, which is that we created specific objects, which we called roles, groups, resources, and organizations. I threw users in here because they're not really part of the access control model, but they're affected by the access control model, right? So that there's a relationship there. So now, in every one of these cases, we have some common capabilities. So even though they have different names and they're used in different ways, underneath it all, they basically all have the same capabilities. So whether You use a group object or use a role object from an OpenIAM perspective, it doesn't really matter. It may matter in terms of how you think about it, but technically it doesn't really make that much of a difference. They all allow you to do kind of the same thing, right? Um, all of them are, they have some common behavior. One is they all support inheritance. So you can create base classes or base objects like your base role or a base group, and you can inherit from it. We only support single level inheritance because it, it it has a potential to get messy enough that introducing multiple inheritance causes a bigger mess. And we see that from people who are developing in, say, Java or C++, or when you get into multiple inheritance, there, well, I don't, in C++ in particular, that it can get kind of nasty pretty quickly, right? And most people don't do it that well. So these objects, they support single inheritance. They also support a notion of metadata type. So one of the things that you'll see if you looked at our internal data model, which is now available as part of our documentation, is that every one of these objects has this concept of an attribute added to it. So there's some predefined object entitlements or attributes that we have, things like your name and your start date and last date and who, and some other things that are common, and then everything else can be a custom attribute. So everything that we didn't think about and you need in your world, it can be extended using that attribute, model. But that attribute model can get chaotic pretty quickly if we just allow free-form attributes to be assigned as you want. So what we did was we have this notion of a metadata type. So you can create new types of objects, and so they're basically more, they're well defined, right? Um, and then, I'm going to get into that a little bit more in a second. We have a separate slide on the whole metadata thing. And then for resources, they're also kind of the same, but you'll notice that we treat them a little bit differently. So like resources are generally used to represent objects. It's like a field on a screen or a URL. It could be it could be an application, right? All of those things are resources. And then we have this notion of a resource type where you can create new resources. So if you wanted to create a new resource called a laptop, you could just create a new resource type called laptop and define what attributes that it should have. And then finally, we have access rights, which are these are basically the fine-grained permissions. So again, we'll dig deeper into that in a second, right? But these basic things make up the access control model. Okay, so here we're kind of talking about metadata a little bit, and I touched on this a little bit that you can create new types, and so think about let's just take a common example, like say we have a user, but in a corporation we may have many types of users, right? We may have employees, we may have part-time employees, we have contractors, we have vendors, partners, and a whole bunch of variations in between those, right? And each one of them is a little bit different. So they may have a bunch of common attributes, and then they may have a few which are basically different and unique to them. So what we can do is we can create a metadata type, which is of type user, and 1 second, just seeing. Oh, sorry. This question is screen to the left, and can I enlarge it? Unfortunately, I am not at my normal desk, um, and it's kind of getting messed up. We will publish the slides afterwards, which will have the proper, the full details to it. So sorry about that. Actually, let me see if I can maximize this. But hang on 1 second. Okay, that should be a little bit better. Sorry about that, everybody. Okay. There's another question. Um, I tried to test the connection on the OpenIAM connector. However, I got an error. It could not be established. So if you don't mind, questions related to the previous sessions, if you can either post them onto the community portal, and we'll try to find time within them. I'd rather not get into them right here just because it's going to derail the focus of today's session. Okay. So, okay. So going back to metadata types. So we have this notion of types and um, so the top level object you would define as a type, right? So like you would say, well, a type is called a contractor, or if it's a role or a group that you're dealing with, you could have something like, if you, let's say, for example, you're dealing with Active Directory, you can have an AD group as a group type, right? And that would be different from an OpenIAM group. The custom attributes that you have within that type, those are called metadata elements, and you can have as many as you want to. And that would basically allow you to extend it, right? So the diagram that we're showing here, we're kind of focusing on users. We're saying that you know the 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 internal user has got an employee ID, a social security number, a date of birth. An external user, it's got things like customer ID and maybe things like an order date, right? I mean, it could be anything that you want it to be. Right? Okay, so continuing from here. So this slide just kind of talks a little bit about inheritance. We talked about this a little bit earlier, and basically the idea here is that you can create your base classes, right? And the main purpose of this is that if you have several roles which seem to have the same behavior, that instead of duplicating it in every single role, which might be easier to do from an implementation point, it will eventually get messy. It will be harder to maintain. So it's better to create a base object where you would have um, these common permissions that you can then extend from, and it will allow you to create child classes or child roles or groups which are significantly lighter and not have to carry this baggage all the time, right? The benefit of this is just that it just simplifies kind of managing access and enforces, a more consistent model, which it's easier to maintain. Okay, the access rights, these are fairly straightforward, right? In that um, yeah, again, let's just use, say, like, for example, like a Windows server. Like you have a file system and you have rights to a folder, and then you have some permissions. You can do read, write, execute. Same thing with, say, like a database, right? You can have a table or a view, and you can, or that's more of a table, less than a view, a table where you have the ability to perform CRUD operations, um, but another user may not, right? So those kind of um, lower level permissions can be done, um, using the access rights. Okay, so there's a question. In previous versions, the RBAC model did not exploit the possibility of giving groups through roles. Is this possible now? Yes, it is. So you can define a role and you can encapsulate uh, groups within it. You can encapsulate roles within it. The painful part is that when you're using it to provision downstream, your Groovy script is going to have to iterate that um, through that role definition. So it will have to go and discover what's inside of it to be able to send those informations downstream. So um, and I believe that the out of the script box scripts that we have now, or the examples that we have, actually do show you how to do that. And this is part of the reason why I think some people have been kind of leaning towards the business rules, because you don't have to do that much work. It kind of does that for you. But in terms of the question, this is definitely possible now. Okay. Going back to the access rights. So we talked about like the normal things, right? You can have your basic types of permissions that you can define. But like with everything else, we defined it so that you can create your own permissions. And there are many times when you need to do that. So say, for example, you are trying to integrate with a banking system, and you have, say, somebody who can approve loans. And in those cases, you may have limits on what those roles, what each person can do. So somebody might be able to approve a loan up to say $10,000. Another one might be able to approve a loan for say up to 100,000. Well, those limits that you have, um, they're not defined in OpenIAM because they're very business specific, but you can define your own access rights and you can use them in your implementation. Okay. So this next slide kind of talks a little bit about roles and the the bulk of it is pretty straightforward, but there's some details that you should keep in mind, especially if you're kind of coming at this for like the first time. So one is when we talk about roles, there are generally two types of roles that we to kind of think about. There's business roles and there are technical roles. Technical roles tend to refer to um, your entitlements within an application. So these are, um, let's say you're going to integrate with like a MariaDB or an Oracle database. Well, the Oracle database has some roles and group memberships of its own, and when you want to model those would become technical roles. Business roles tend to align with a organizational role or function, like say, for example, you have an HR manager or a finance analyst or a support engineer. And those business roles would be encapsulated with a collection of technical roles, which kind of make it up. Right? So you can use these two together, and they kind of complement each other. They're both still roles. They just are being represented differently, right? And if you want to think about it, that you could, basically use the metadata type to say, well, this is a AWS role or an Oracle role, right? And then you could have a more general business role definition that you can use for this. A couple of recommendations, avoid making overly granular roles, right? So that's one part. Um, if you're creating business roles, try to align with the business structure, and use that base kind of role hierarchy to kind of be able to model the relationships that you want. That being said, my observation over the last many years is that many of our customers really struggle with creating these business roles. It's something, I mean, they often have matrices internally in terms of how they're assigning access, but it's often very loosely defined and they really struggle. And um, we try not to harp on this topic because it can completely paralyze your entire project. Like, if especially if it's a large organization, to have to go and do this, manually can become very, very time consuming and it will completely derail the entire project. And for that reason, we have another option, which is the business rules, right? And we'll get to that in a second. But just keep that in mind that you don't have to do the whole model upfront to be able to move forward. Generally, you can take an area and have like a phased approach and kind of roll this out as you go over time. Um, to address this later on this year, we will be releasing a role mining and modeling module as part of the product, and it will be using a machine learning framework to be able to kind of mine that data and make role recommendations and discover them to basically to help with this purpose. Right? Okay. Um, so we talked a little bit about the business rules, and this slide is really talking about how we can automate the assignment of roles and other entitlements. And this is where the business rules come in. So the business rules are basically an attribute level rule definition, right? So you can say that, for example, if my job title says senior support engineer and I am in tech support and I am, say, you know, based in Europe, right? Then I'm going to get certain access, right? You could say, well, I'm going to get an AD account. I'm going to be placed in this OU. I'm going to get certain shared folders and so on and so forth, right? So all of that can be done at an attribute-based level. And if I move to a different role, So any one of those things starts to become false, then there's another, definition there, which is to take away the access which is no longer needed and to give you new access that your new position requires, right? So this is your birthright access. And we can do this outside of these role definitions, right? And it's an easier way to get started, and we can incrementally keep improving this. Okay. So we're going to shift gears as we normally do to kind of look at more practical things, right? So I want to just kind of introduce everyone to like where these things are on the UI. So we'll talk about creating a metadata type, we'll create a role, we'll create a business rule, we'll take a look at how we can automate this whole life cycle part and just get started on that. We'll just log out and come back in clean so that we have some better direction. Okay, so I'm still using the same demo instance or that we set up a few days ago. Okay. So I'm going to log into the admin console. Okay, so we're in the admin console. First thing, let's go take a look at the metadata types. So if we go to administration and if we go to the metadata types option, right, you'll see a bunch of types which are already created and they're grouped by um, well, by, by various objects. So if we say, let's say, for example, user, you'll see a user object and you see different, the status codes. So it's used for a lot of different things, right? So for example, if I look at user object type and I search for that, you'll see there's a few, user object types that have already been created. But you'll see that there's also, a status in here and various other things. So I talked about the main reasons why we use it, but it has other capabilities to it, right? So like, for example, if you wanted to introduce a new user status that we're going to support, you can just create a new metadata element to be able to support that, right? So in this case, let's go ahead and create a new type. And let's call this, oh, let's call this an AWS policy, right? Just for argument's sake. And I'm going to say this is a role or a type of role. It is active. And we're going to turn on a couple of features. And so now I have a new metadata type. What I need to do now is to define, um, sorry, I need to create additional elements, right? So I can go to new metadata element, and now I can just start to create additional things, right? And we can just call this something, right? Say, these don't have to be the same, right? It's the display name doesn't have to be the same. You can describe what it is, right? And there could be other things that we say here. We can say, is this required? Is this an auditable, attribute? Um, you know, so in this case, let's just make it public. And at this point, it should go ahead and add that attribute in to the AWS policy, right? And so this way we can build out um, the additional, options, right? So we have this. So now if we were to go to, say, for example, a role, let's create a new role. Okay, and in our role type, we will see the AWS policy that we created, right? And so, we can, again, these are, this the static attributes that we've defined here. And we can just say, right? And actually, you know what, let's not do that. Let's create one which actually has other things which I can use. So let's just say we're going to make a provisioning role, you know, right? And I'm going to get entitled it to our AD, right? And these are, values that I can give. Now, there's some other parameters here and things like, um, okay, so there's a question that says, why I can't create a metadata type. It says unknown error. Please contact the administrator. Do you see any other errors in your file system, in your logs, that would help to understand what's going wrong in your environment, right? This is this is capabilities that have been there for a long, long time. So if you're having a problem with it, I think it'd be helpful to know what the error message is that you're getting at, and we can help you kind of resolve that. Okay, so other things. So this is role parent. The role parent is helps us to draw the relationship with the parent role. So this is like if we're creating inheritance, we would have created our our parent object first, and then we would have linked it together. If you created it afterwards, you could still create the relationship. There's nothing that's going to stop you there. The other part here is we have things like a role owner and a role admin. These are users and groups that we can create. They're really used for the workflow in terms of who's going to be approving membership into this role. This same capability exists on resources and groups as well. And um, yeah, and also you can use this for your access certifications as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and save that. Okay, and at this point we should have a new role definition, but it doesn't do anything except it creates an account in AD. It doesn't have any other capabilities. So to build that out further, I can go to role entitlements, and now I can go and add to this group, so I can pick, again, this webinar host, and this was a group that we created last time. And so now if somebody were to become a member of my test role, they would get provision into AD. They would get a group membership here as well, right? So this would help, again, if you're going to use a role model, if you have business roles, we would have had other things in here, like maybe other applications that you're going to, be able to create into and kind of, build this out. Okay. So let's go from here to the business rules. So if we go to business rules, um, there's two steps here that you need to follow. One is you need to create the rule, and the next part is to create the target. The rule are the criteria of what's going to trigger that rule definition. So meaning, whatever it is, it could be like a status, it could be some attributes about the user. And then the target is what gets executed, what happens when those conditions are true, right? So for example, if we were to go do something like this, right? Let's say call this training, call it rule one, right? And we're going to make this active. And let's just say the first one, now let's delete that. Let's say it's an expression. Okay. And the expression is say that if let's just say if the status is, for example, equals and it's active, right? Then I want to do something, right? So I can go ahead and save that. That could be one, and I'm purposely doing something besides like organizational, right? Because I want to be able to show how these rules can be used beyond just the attribute level access. And let's say like the next one, we want to say, um, right? We will, let's have a conditional here. We're going to add an expression. And this time we're going to say, we're going to use a job title and say it's, we're going to say ignore case. And we want to say if you're either a support engineer, um, or I'm going to add another expression here. And again, we're going to go with the title. And do value support wildcards? They do if you say starts with or ends with. So not in a traditional sense. Um, and yeah, and the question is, can we do this operation also with a script? Um, and if yes, can I show you how? Well, are you referring to executing a script or are you talking about putting this inside the transformation script? Okay, so let's say we have another one here, right? And we can say you're, you know, right? I mean, we're just picking two different titles. So now we have both of these built out, right? We have the conditions which are built out. So next thing is here is let's create a target. So the first target, this could be well, status is active, right? You can make the rule active. And so at this point, we need to build out what to do, right? So here, if the status is active, I can, you know, activate the user. That could be the first thing that I do. So the question was, can I do this in a transformation script? I'd like to understand if we can use a script to manually program a change logic that you're setting from the UI. So 100% yes. So in fact, before we introduced the business rules capability about a year and a half, 2 years ago, all of this work was done inside the script. And you can go to town and you can do everything you want in the scripts. Question becomes, why would you want to, right? So you can certainly do that. It's more work, more to maintain. The only reason why you would want to do that is if there's limitations on what the rules can offer you, what you can do within the code, right? So if you want to do it there, you certainly can. And when we not on today's sessions, but the session that we do next time, we will look at the going into the Groovy scripts a bit more, a bit deeper, and I will show you how you can um, um, you can use conditions and you can do all of this stuff, from within the scripts, right? So here, say we change the status as active, but we could also do other things, right? We could, you know, add a person to a group. We can initiate a workflow. So there's various behavior that we can add, from here. Okay. Question is, okay, is there a possibility of bulk loading business rules in the roadmap? So in the roadmap, yes, it is. And I'm actually trying to get it moved up because it is probably the single biggest pain in the butt that people are asking for. There is a plan to have a bulk import export capability for a whole variety of objects. And the use case was basically to be able to move them from one environment to another. Right now, there's a limitation around this, right? And I'm trying to actually get this added into the 4.2.2 release so that we can, um, we can, you know, um, we can make this part a lot easier, right? Just a lot more easier to maintain. And the question is, scripting options might be useful when promoting changes, code changes from dev to test, unless there are other mechanisms to track changes. So when it's a good question. If you have the ability to promote things, and this is what the previous question was about being able to bulk load, which means that you have the ability to also do export, then you don't really need to do this in your code. And it's having to redo these things from each environment is error prone, and it's a problem, right? And there's no reason why we can't export these things out to a JSON file, which you can then import and just save everybody a whole lot of work in the process, right? So um, this is going to be there sooner instead of later, because it's needed by a lot of customers right now. Okay. So okay, so here we talk about action. So let's just go through this a little bit. We For example, we can just say add user to a group, right? We can say this is our the group membership in the application, right? And again, we can build this out to be a lot more elaborate. We can assign licenses if we needed to. For example, like if this were like say Office 365 that we're integrating with, we could have decided whether we assign an E3 license or not, right? Other things that you could do here is you could have also added a resource object which represents an OU to put people in the right OU, right? So the point that I'm getting at is the more we can do from here with less scripting, A, it goes faster, it's less error prone, it's easier to maintain, and once we give you guys the option to import and export, it will make the amount of scripting and implementation time significantly less, right? Okay, last thing that I want to go over today is um, is the ability to be able to synchronize. So we have in our provisioning, there's a menu option called synchronization. We used it last time to be able to pull data in from um, from Active Directory. So we pulled in groups and then we pulled in users and their group memberships. So so if we here is an out of the box example, and you'll see that there's an example for users, for roles, groups. These are all there to load. And also there's an option here called CSV user entitlements. If you need to, invariably, you may have applications which you cannot integrate with through connectors, and you need to bulk load the entitlements which are there because you need to build a service catalog and you need to do access certifications and a variety of things. That's a predefined CSV file format for which there's already a script, and you can just use that to be able to load data. And again, it will save you time in terms of having to create new scripts. Okay, so let's take a look at our CSV file, example here. And so what we did was we have, again, simple file, right? The source is a CSV file. The type of object we're going to load is going to be users. We're going to do a complete sync because it's CSV file. And then we have, um, this we didn't talk about last time, right? So we have a validation rule. So these things are all getting, let me take a step back. When you run this thing, there's a preprocessor and a post-processor. The preprocessor runs before synchronization, the activities start. The post-processor runs when they end. In between, you have a record level set of scripts being fired. One is the validation rule. The other one is the transformation rule. The validation rule is checking, you can define your rules to check for various things, including bad data. If something isn't formatted correctly, whatever, you can reject it, and check it there. The transformation rule is taking the data and is mapping it to things that OpenIAM understands. Okay. So I created a file earlier, um, and I'm going to pick that CSV file. And we can preview it, hopefully. Right, so we have some basic data here. And then if all looks good, I'm going to go ahead and do a sync now. Okay, and this is going to process, and I'm going to go ahead and pull up. Okay, I think there's a question here. Question is the validation rule and transformation rule, is it out of the box from OpenIAM, or do we need to configure that our own? So there is an out of the box script. You don't need to write your own, but if you look at the out of the box script, you'll find that it doesn't really go very far, in which case you will need to build on it. Now, that being said, um, while we're doing these training sessions and we're publishing the content on our community every after every session, we're also um, trying to take the scripts that we're using and we're building them out a little bit further and documenting them significantly more and uploading them to the community. So probably tomorrow or so, you should start seeing the scripts that, a more complete set of scripts for the AD that we used last time. And then we should also see a more complete CSV sync that you can use. So I would, in addition to what's out of the box, take a look at what we're going to share up there. It's going to, um, if it doesn't save you time and just using it out of the box, it will at least give you examples of what you can do to be able to get things done. Okay. So there's a question that says, so you are suggesting to use business rules as tools for complex business roles? Like I need to have a complex business role for accountants that create 80 accounts, 10 groups. I'm not suggesting that you replace the role model. I'm suggesting that you can use the business rules in conjunction with the role model, especially if a good role model doesn't exist, right? Um, it's unfor it has the same capabilities that the business roles do have, and it can be used to very quickly do things and save work. So if the business roles are something that work for you and your implementation, there's nothing wrong with it, right? I My own personal bias is that if we do have a role model, I would rather implement the role model and I would keep my business rules fairly light in the targets to say, make them a member of that role, right? That's kind of how I would do it. I wouldn't want a rule which has got 50 entitlements in it. It's gonna, I don't know, that's more of a philosophical thing, but that's just my own personal opinion. You know, you can argue it either way, right? Okay. So we have this, and let's see if I were to, go and let's see, check my CSV file and get one of those employee IDs. Okay, so no, I, one second. Let's try this again. All right, this is when I created earlier. So you'll see that that the users are being created. Let's um, let's spend a couple of minutes talking about those transformation scripts. So this is a sample sync script, right? So forget about all the stuff that's in the imports. The main things that you need to keep in mind that all of these transformation scripts, the validation rules even for the AD transformation scripts, they're all going to extend a base class. It's this abstract user transformation script. The reason we extend it because that base class has a whole bunch of methods in it for the common stuff that we need to do. Things like adding user attributes, adding users to roles, to groups, to supervisors and organizations. It's basically a difference between writing one line of code versus having to write repetitive code again and again which there's no point in it. It's error prone. It's more for you to debug. And if we've already done it, why would you want to do it again, right? So keep that in mind that you have this base class that you need to extend. And without it, it's not going to work because our framework is going to look for a script that extends this base class. And it must have a couple of methods. It's got an execute and it's got an init. These two methods must exist. And if you look at it, basically what the inside that execute, there's two things which are being passed in. One is this thing called a row object, and the other one is provision user. The row object is your data in your source, right? So these are all the columns in your CSV file or any other source system that you have. They're being passed in as basically um, a collection of attributes, right? Which are the sysline object. And then provision user is the internal representation of a user. It's got all the predefined attributes, plus it's got things to add roles, supervisors, organizations, and so on and so forth, right? And you'll see that it's doing the script's very basic. It's basically saying populate the object, right? That's the first step. And then it's saying if, by the way, this is a new user, just checking the status, add this user to a role, right? So this was the earlier question. What can I do in my script? Well, this is an example. I'm checking the status and I'm adding them to a role, right? Now, if I look at populate, it's basically, you know, it's getting a record, an attribute from that map, that line object. And if it's certain predefined ones, it's setting the attributes. But in other cases, it's going to go ahead and basically assign them, into the user object, right? And again, we're going to, you know, uh, clean this up, document it, and post it in the community. And you'll be able to use it as an example to kind of go forward. But the idea is to give complete examples which are explained properly so that you can go forward from here, right? That's it for our session today. And obviously next time we will go a lot deeper into these Groovy scripts. Um, Question is, will I share the test user CSV file? Yes, I will. When I post it on the community, we will have a supporting CSV file that goes with it. So you have a one-to-one map that you can leverage, right? And we may post a couple of options, which are variants, which are kind of, using a CSV, using the scripts to assign things versus business rules and so on and so forth. Okay. So again, thank you everybody for the time and the questions. Appreciate you guys making the time for this.